Hey, who are you? This is my reflection, I'm Bernie. And this is my reflection, no way. I'm Bernie. You're an imposter, if you're the real Bernie. Then what are the projects we did in class? In class we wrote blog posts, and made a radio drama, documentary, an experimental narrative. Okay. So what was the point of these projects? To replicate the real progression of technology and narratives. Why don't you? Try to tell me what the purpose of the blog was. Well, the course blog is possibly both the starting and ending point when considering the progression of technology and its effect on narrative. It is the beginning in that it is the most simple form of narrative or writing, and it mimics classic forms of storytelling, such as books or other written stories. However, it is also one of the most recent forms of narrative in that it is being shared online. In doing so, a whole new dimension is added to the piece of writing. By sharing our thoughts online, it forced us to write for an audience similar to what an actual writer would do. In this way, writing for the blog was equivalent to the starting point of narratives from a technological standpoint. However, the blog also allowed us to interact with other people's posts. In this way, it replicated the most recent technological impacts on narrative of interactivity. Why don't you tell me about the first project, if you really are Bernie? In the first real project, we created a radio drama. As a technological step, the use of playback allowed us to bring to life the written narrative. While one of the reasons for doing this project was to imitate the challenges of recording a story live-in, incorporating sound effects, etc., the technological progression purpose of the project was to show the power of bringing the written word to life. The radio dramas gave us the opportunity to compare the spoken word with the written word of a narrative. We were able to see that hearing the voice of an actor was able to convey tone and emotion much more powerfully than simply reading it. It allowed you to be sucked into the story so much more easily because you had a voice to connect to a character, and that voice could show you the how they felt instead of telling you. On the other hand, looking into recorded voice and written text also showed the constraints and styles forced upon the narratives by the format. In textual narrative, the author has the freedom to pace the story in any way they feel fit. They also have the ability to go into great detail about whatever they choose. In a live recording, however, the story is constrained by time and the interest of the audience. As a result, a radio broadcast must choose to only present the information necessary to the story, as well as finding creative ways to bring in the setting and situations without simply stating them. Additionally, radio presentations must find a way to transition between different scenes and points in time, whereas written stories would have no such challenge. Let's hear you try to explain the second project. Our second project was to create an audio documentary. This project mirrored the technology's ability to record then edit audio, which could then be pieced together to form a story or narrative. In doing so, some of the challenges of live recording are erased, while creating some of its own challenges. When creating our audio documentaries, more focus was put on how to structure the story than in the radio dramas. While the radio dramas were recorded live and in one take, the audio documentaries were a construction of a number of recordings that were jammed together to create one story. As a result, transitions and cohesiveness became much more important and challenging. Transitions were needed to bring together two recordings that were meant to relate directly to each, yet there still needed to be a way to distinguish the differences between the two recorded pieces in order to compare and contrast between them, and emphasizes how they were contributing to the story. For example, the audio documentaries were the first instance where we were able to experiment with an overlap between two pieces. By utilizing this effect, we were able to see a much greater sense of cohesion between two different recordings. The editing and rearranging of the audio also gave us the opportunity to control the progress and order of the story presented. Since we could choose when certain statements would be said or when ideas would be brought up, we could control the audience's perceptions as the story progressed while still keeping the cohesion present. Why don't you tell us about the last project, Bernie, if that's who you say you are? Our final project was to create an experimental audio-visual narrative. The advance of this project was obviously the introduction of images into the narrative. By adding the visual to the audio, it adds depth to the spoken story, as well as eliminating the need for some audio. The video, firstly, allows you to see things such as settings or characters that would otherwise have to be described to you. In doing so, a story can be compacted and focus more on saying things that further the plot of the story, rather than taking the time to tell the audience what is going on or where they are. The visual also plays a large role in adding depth to the story. It can do this in one of two ways: through backing up what is being said or by contrasting with the audio portion of the story. In the first case, when the visual closely backs up the story presented in the audio, it is much more powerful than purely audio or visual, because it allows you to both hear and see what is going on, giving you a much more complete story. It also gives the story the opportunity to bring in many small subtleties to create one complex story. Conversely, when the image doesn't match what the audio is suggesting, it can emphasize and empower the story as much, if not more, than if the two matched each other. For example, when an actor does not match what you would expect them to look like based upon their voice, it further draws your attention to each of those details. Similarly, when images that don't directly match the audio, the audience is forced to create their own similarities and are therefore given a unique story. I guess there is only one way to finally decide who the real Bernie is. And what is that? Only the real Bernie would know what the best reference was out of all the projects. That's easy. The best reference was in the experimental narrative when Beavis and Butthead talk about Star Trek while watching the Star Wars music video. I knew you were a fraud. The best reference is in the radio drama when I mention Engelbert Humperdinck writing the ballet. And then halfway through the music it plays the intro music to Lesbian Seagull. Damn, you're good.